Baby boomers own 51.4% of all wealth in America, while making up just 20% of the population. Millennials, the same percentage of Americans, own 10.3%. That's not a typo. One generation has 5 times the wealth of another, despite being the exact same size. And before you blame avocado toast or financial irresponsibility, the math tells a completely different story that nobody wants to admit out loud. Here's what actually happened. The economic game changed, but only one generation got to play with the old rules. And those rules were absurdly generous in ways that will never exist again. Start with housing. In 1970, the median home price was $23,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $180,000 in today's money. Reasonable, right? Except the actual median home price today is $408,000. If housing had simply kept pace with regular inflation since 1970, that same house would cost $177,000 instead of over $400,000. Housing has outpaced inflation by 150% over 5 decades. Boomers bought homes in the 70s when inflation was high, which sounds terrible until you realize what that actually meant. Their mortgages were locked in at fixed rates while inflation eroded the real value of what they owed. Meanwhile, home values exploded upward through the 80s and 90s. They essentially got paid to own houses. Today, just 33% of 27-year-olds own homes compared to 40% of boomers at the same age. The opportunity window slammed shut, but housing is only the beginning of this financial massacre. College tuition has increased 1,200% since 1980, while overall inflation rose just 236%. A year of college in 1963 cost about $5,000 in today's money. By 2022, that same year cost nearly $15,000. And those numbers are conservative. Between 1977 and 2026, college tuition experienced an average inflation rate of 5.92% per year. That $20,000 education from 1977 would cost over $334,000 today for the equivalent purchase. Student loan debt now totals $1.83 trillion nationwide. Boomers graduated with minimal debt or none at all. Millennials and Gen Z start their careers decades behind before earning their first paycheck. Now layer in wage stagnation, and the picture gets genuinely bleak. In 1973, the average worker earned $29.15 per hour in today's dollars. As of 2024, that average wage was $30.13, essentially zero real wage growth in over 50 years. Your paycheck buys the same amount today as it did when Nixon was president, but worker productivity didn't stagnate. From 1948 until the late 70s, pay and productivity climbed together. Workers got more efficient, they earned more money. That linkage was intentional policy. Then, in the late 70s, policymakers systematically dismantled every protection, ensuring wages grew with productivity. Unions weakened, minimum wage increases became rare, tax rates on top incomes dropped, productivity kept climbing, but wages flatlined. The result is a generation working harder than their parents, producing more value per hour, yet taking home roughly the same purchasing power while facing costs that have exploded beyond recognition. It's not about work ethic or financial literacy. The economic infrastructure fundamentally shifted against younger generations in ways that are mathematically impossible to overcome through individual effort alone. This isn't about blame or resentment. It's about understanding what actually happened, so you can stop beating yourself up for struggling in a system designed to extract rather than build wealth. And once you see the numbers clearly, the path forward becomes very different than what traditional advice suggests. So what happens when you're trapped in this economic vice? Your brain starts making decisions that look irrational from the outside, but make perfect sense when survival becomes the immediate concern. Behavioral economists call this scarcity mindset, and it rewires how you process risk and opportunity. When you're living paycheck to paycheck because housing eats 40% of your income and student loans take another 15, your brain shifts into threat detection mode. Long-term thinking becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford. Saving for retirement sounds absurd when you're $300 away from overdraft fees. Investing feels like gambling when one unexpected car repair could cascade into missing rent. This creates what psychologists identify as present bias on steroids. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for future planning, gets overridden by the amygdala screaming about immediate threats. The mechanism designed to keep you alive in emergencies becomes your permanent operating system. Here's the cruel twist. Boomers accumulated wealth during a period when delayed gratification actually worked as advertised. Skip the fancy coffee, save diligently, invest consistently, and compound interest would build security over decades. That formula assumed stable employment, affordable housing, and wages that kept pace with productivity. Remove those conditions and the advice becomes mathematically useless. You can cut every luxury, live like a monk, and still watch the gap between you and homeownership widen every year because property values are rising faster than you can possibly save. The game changed, but the advice didn't update. Chronic financial stress also does something measurably destructive to cognitive function. Studies from Princeton and Harvard found that financial scarcity reduces cognitive capacity equivalent to losing 13 IQ points. Your working memory gets consumed by constant financial calculations. Can I afford groceries and gas? Which bill gets paid late this month? Is that noise from my car expensive? This mental bandwidth tax means you're making every other life decision with diminished capacity. Career moves, relationship choices, health decisions, all get processed by a brain running on fumes because financial stress is eating your cognitive resources for breakfast. Meanwhile, wealth accumulation requires exactly the kind of strategic long-term thinking that scarcity mindset makes nearly impossible. You need mental space to research investment options, negotiate salary increases, identify career pivots, or start side businesses. But when your brain is trapped in survival mode, those opportunities become invisible even when they're right in front of you. The wealth gap isn't just financial, it's cognitive, psychological, and compounding in ways that entrench themselves across generations. Boomers hold $85 trillion in assets, while millennials hold $18 trillion, despite similar population sizes. That's not 5 times wealthier. It's a fundamentally different economic reality that shapes everything from stress levels to lifespan. Baby boomers own 54% of all stocks. Millennials own 8%. Pension entitlements show $16 trillion versus $3 trillion. Private business ownership runs $7 trillion versus under $2 trillion. Even among millennials who've done everything right, educated, employed, responsible, the structural disadvantages remain mathematically insurmountable through individual effort alone. This matters because your financial decisions aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening inside a brain shaped by chronic stress, operating in an economy designed for conditions that no longer exist, following advice calibrated for a world that disappeared before you entered it. Understanding this doesn't fix the problem, but it does something important. It stops you from internalizing failure that isn't actually yours. The system shifted, your brain is responding rationally to irrational circumstances. And recognizing that is the first step toward making different choices within the constraints you actually face rather than the constraints boomers imagine still exist. The actual path forward isn't about working harder or budgeting better. It's about recognizing that individual solutions cannot fix structural problems. You're not failing at a game that's still fair. You're playing a rigged version nobody warned you about. Stop measuring yourself against metrics designed for an economy that vanished 40 years ago. Your grandparents bought houses on single incomes because houses cost 3 times annual salary instead of 8. Your parents graduated without debt because college was accessible, not extractive. Those weren't moral victories. They were mathematical realities that no longer exist. What you do with this information matters more than the information itself. You can keep internalizing systemic failure as personal inadequacy, or you can make financial decisions based on the actual game board in front of you, not the one boomers remember. The math doesn't lie about what happened, but it also doesn't determine what you do next. That part's still yours.